We all want to know why we're here, what our purpose in life is. And we all think that if we can find our true self, certainly our true self is going to have the answers, and our true self is going to point us in the direction we need to go to live the fulfilling life we were meant to live. Well, I'm here to tell you that you're never going to find your true self. And that might seem like a harsh statement, especially coming from someone like me, who is constantly encouraging you to realize your full potential. And you might be thinking, well, doesn't realizing my full potential require self discovery? And doesn't self discovery mean that I have to find my true self? Well, I guess I would say yes and no. And I will get into more detail on why I say that later in the post. But first, we need to talk about 3 reasons that you are never going to find your true self. The first reason is because you are an imitation of the people and society you surround yourself with. The second reason is because you are a collection of constantly changing parts. And the third reason is that in order to find your true self, you have to be willing to make a great sacrifice. Plus, on top of these reasons, psychologists, artists, poets, philosophers, theologians, scientists, everyone since the creation of time has been trying to answer the question, who am I? And none of them have been able to answer it. They haven't been able to come to any kind of significant consensus. So what makes you think that you're going to be the one to figure it out? I'm not going to be the one to figure it out, and I'm pretty sure you're not going to be the one either. So why even bother talking about this then? Why are we even going to discuss it? Because I think it's still possible to live a fulfilling life even if you don't find your true self. I think you can still realize your full potential, and the reason is because you can still gain an understanding of what influences the shaping of you. And I think that this understanding will allow you to know your true self as much as humanly possible. So let's see if we can gain that understanding today. That's what our goal is going to be. So let's talk about reason number 1. I am a copy of a copy of a copy. You may not recognize that, but those are actually lyrics from a Nine Inch Nails song, and titled "Copy of a." And I would say that no truer words have ever been spoken. And yes, I'm being a little dramatic, but the point is, it gives me a great lead in to discussing why you are an imitation of the people and the society that you surround yourself with. All you have to do is think about it for a minute, because from day one, you mimic everyone around you. We learn by observing people. You mimic your parents first, then you start to mimic family members and friends. Then you start mimicking celebrities and other influencers that you see. Then as you grow up, you start to mimic your romantic partners, your coworkers, your mentors, whoever. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And psychologists call this observational learning. Shocker, right? They would name it that. But observational learning is the process of observing and imitating a specific behavior. And we do this because we're not necessarily modeling these behaviors because we want to be just like our parents or friends or coworkers, whoever, but because we see something in that person that we see that that person has obtained something that we also want to obtain. And our brains are hardwired to know that if we copy their behaviors, we have a good chance of getting whatever they have that we want. So that's why we start out mimicking other people's behaviors. But we can take it even one step further. We also imitate people's behaviors and the behaviors of society because by doing so it actually helps us figure out who we are. By taking on the roles of others and seeing what fits and what doesn't, you kind of get a feel for who you are. And I took this quote from Lumen Learning, but they're actually discussing an American, he was a philosopher, yeah, I was going to say psychologist, but an American philosopher named George Herbert Mead. And he was the one who introduced this idea that we find our true selves through the company we keep, basically. And here's a quote from Lumen Learning. For Mead, existence in a community comes before individual consciousness. First, one must participate in different social positions within society, and only subsequently can one use that experience to take the perspective of others and thus become self-conscious. So that just kind of brings that point home, that quote. But the real question is, how can you be your true self if you are constantly modeling everyone else's behaviors? And I'm going to get to answering that question, but first let's talk about reason number 2 that you will never find your true self, and that is that you are a collection of constantly changing parts. This is pretty much a basic truth, but it's not something that we stop to deliberately think about very often. So the most obvious changes that we experience are to our physical body. You see those right away, and other people see those. But we are constantly changing in other ways too. For instance, the pathways in our brains are constantly changing. Yours are changing right now just by listening to this message. Mine are changing by delivering the message. And as noted by psychologist Karen Young, every thought, feeling, and action creates a pathway in your brain. Whenever you do something over and over, that pathway becomes stronger and stronger. The stronger the pathway, the easier that behavior, thought, or feeling will be. So your body's physically changing, your brain, the pathways in your brain are changing, which are changing your thoughts and feelings. But beyond that, also our circumstances are constantly changing. For example, right now I'm sitting in a comfortable house. Luckily, I feel very fortunate for that. I have no serious worries at the moment. I'm sharing my thoughts with the world. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. Those are some great circumstances. But I also know, because I've experienced it on more than one occasion, I also know that all of that can be taken away from me at any second, and my circumstances can completely change. And when your circumstances change, your behaviors, your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, they all change too. Not only that, but your physical body will experience changes as well. So, does that mean that your self has changed? And the real question then is, how can you be your true self if you are a collection of constantly changing parts? Again, I'll attempt to answer that question, but we have one more reason to talk about. Reason number 3, why you will not ever find your true self. Because you have to be willing to lose your life in order to find it. That was a quote from my main man, Jordan Peterson, and you knew I was not going to leave this video without talking about Peterson or Maslow in some way. But anyways, there's a powerful quote from Peterson. You have to be willing to lose your life in order to find it. And reason number 3, of course, was that you have to be willing to make a great sacrifice to find your true self. You have to be willing to give up something that you value, and maybe even something that you love. And you give this thing up because you know that in the long run, your future is going to be so much better if you do sacrifice this thing. And maybe you will even find your true self. But how many of us ever make a great sacrifice? I mean, it's hard enough to make small sacrifices on a daily basis, like walking past that plate full of warm cookies because you said you weren't going to eat any sugar today, or any, whatever, you know what I mean. To not eat any would be kind of crazy, but or you shut off Netflix before it automatically goes to the next show because you know you have other things that you were dedicated to doing today. Or how about just ignoring that blinking light on your phone that's telling you have a notification because you need to get your work done? I mean, all of these things are hard enough to sacrifice, let alone a great sacrifice, making a great sacrifice. And I've made a couple of sacrifices in my life that seem great to me, but they're probably not really that great in the scheme of things. But I can still attest to the fact that each one has brought me one step closer to finding my true self. But the question really remains, are any of us actually capable of making a sacrifice great enough to find our true self? And finally, we're getting to my answers here. So, one way to define our true self is by thinking of it as being synonymous with your core values. Because much like your core values, your true self doesn't change, even though your interests, your preferences, your behaviors, your thoughts, your attitudes, whatever, all that changes. But your true self, your core values, never change. So with this definition in mind of thinking of your true self as being synonymous with your core values, let's picture Mr. Potato Head. So this might seem like we're going to take a weird turn here, but stick with me. Alright, so imagine that your core values, your true self, are the potato. So the first question that I posed was, how can you be your true self if you are constantly modeling everyone else's behaviors? If we think about Mr. Potato Head, He's tried on many different outfits. He's been a man, he's been a woman, he's been Disney characters, he's been all kinds of characters. He's even been Batman. Yes, he was even Batman once. But at the end of the day, he's still a potato. Once you take off all those outfits, he's still a potato. The same is true for you and me. My core value, or potato, is authenticity. And even though I've tried on many different outfits in my day, at the end of the day, I always come back to seeking authenticity in my life. So I've tried being an accountant and a writer, a wife, a mother, and yes, I even tried to sell Mary Kay cosmetics once. So, we've all tried on all these different outfits. And I modeled other people's behaviors as I was doing so, as I tried each of these outfits on. And no, I wasn't always showing my true self, but that's all part of the course of self-discovery. And at the end of the day, my authenticity, or my true self, is the outfit that I always go back to. So how can you be your true self? Sorry, this is the second question. So that's the end. That's my answer for the first question. Second question. How can you be your true self if you are a constantly changing collection of parts? So again, thinking of Mr. Potato Head. Sometimes he has a red oval-shaped nose. Sometimes he has like a human-looking nose. Sometimes he has a mustache. Sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he wears glasses. Sometimes he doesn't. You can dress him up any way you want to. But still, at the end of the day, he's a potato. You too have experienced physical changes, psychological changes, emotional changes, environmental changes. You're experiencing changes all the time. But at the end of the day, your true self, your core values, are the one thing that remain constant. If you really stop to think about it, you will find that there's a common thread through your whole life, and that is your core value. The third question, are any of us capable of making a sacrifice great enough to find our true self? Perhaps. And I say perhaps because if we use my definition of true self, meaning your core values, then I would say the answer is yes. Because, for example, I sacrificed my career as a CPA to create this organization. Why? Well, there were many reasons, but really what it all came back to was that I was sacrificing my authenticity to stay in that career. My authenticity was being compromised on a daily basis. Finally got to the point where I just couldn't live that way anymore. And the only way to strengthen, buttress my authenticity, or my true self, was to sacrifice the safety and security of my career. Then the question is, well, did that sacrifice work? Well, that's left to be seen, I would say, but I can tell you that I have never felt more like my authentic self in my entire life than I do right now. So I would say, I think it worked, but time will tell, right? Now, as we get close to wrapping up this video or audio, you might still be a little bit confused about why I'm saying you'll never find your true self. Because I just said that your true self is synonymous with your core values, and of course you can identify what your core values are, and they never change. So why can't you find your true self? That kind of doesn't make sense. Well, the reason I say that is because even though understanding your core values will allow you to know your true self as much as is humanly possible, that doesn't mean that you or I are right about who you are. Again, we don't know if it's our physical body, our thoughts, our soul, what is I. I mean, we still don't know that. And I want to go back and answer the question then that I posed in the introduction, which was, in order to realize your full potential, don't you need to find your true self? No, I don't think you have to find your true self to realize your full potential, because your full potential, which is what you are capable of becoming, it's fluid, because you are always learning, you are always growing, and your circumstances are always changing as well. So what you are capable of today is going to be different than what you were capable of yesterday, whereas your true self does not change. So yes, I believe you can still realize your full potential today, even though you haven't found your true self. So what do we do now? What do you do with all this information that I just presented to you? What do you take away from this video or audio? Well, I would say, number one, stop trying to be your true self. Instead, why don't you focus on personifying your core values, And I believe that at the end of the day, if you do that, I bet you're going to realize your full potential along the way. If you need help naming your core values, if you haven't done that yet, go to the narrative post. There's a link in there that will take you to a different post that discusses core values, and there's also a link there to a questionnaire I put together that can help you identify your core values, or else I can help you do that as well, and you'll see that if you click on that link. Then, of course, I put a worksheet together to help you go from inspiration to action, so go ahead and check that out. There's a link to the narrative post to that worksheet as well, so check that out. And until next time, stay curious.